and welcome to the podcast of Loughborough University's Institute of Advanced Studies, a podcast where our international fellows discuss the most pressing issues of today that we're all facing and share their exciting research ideas. We hope you enjoy today's talk. Thank you for tuning in.
Good afternoon, everybody. So most of you have talked around here and so forth, but my name is Everardt. I am from Tshwane University of Technology, which is situated in South Africa, and which is in Pretoria, which is the capital of the country itself. So yes, I am part of the civil engineering department, and I did a PhD in urban and regional planning, but it's interlinks with regards to urban infrastructure and transportation planning itself. So just a mix of that. So, and a lot of my presentations, which I'm going to show, is with regards to supervision, which I've done, and how I've worked with students and so forth, with regards to research projects itself. So, if you haven't known where Pretoria is, there's Africa, and there is South Africa, and basically Tshwane, which is our council, metropolitan, is situated in the northern part of Gauteng itself. So, in South Africa, as a context, there's a big inequality with regards to multiple aspects. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, especially 11 as well, there's a lot of gaps that needs to be filled with regards to that itself. So, for instance, the accessibility to data, the accessibility to services as such is not always available to everybody with regards to basic needs itself. So, my question to the audience is, whom of you have used public transportation to get here this morning? So, within South Africa, yes, we do have public transportation. Part of my studies is to evaluate public transportation and look at a user-centered design with regard to public transportation itself. So this is Pretoria itself with Tshwane, which is the metropolitan itself, and it consists out of 17 corridors, main corridors, and it also consists out of 3 transfer stations itself, which is basically Pretoria, Centurion, and Menlyn. So if I can show it like this, you can see I've made circles whereby the larger corridors are and where it's exactly situated itself. So I did ask the question with regards to public transportation itself. And what will happen, for instance, in this area if public transportation stands still for a week or two? You'll be dependent on different nodes. You'll look at where you can get a lift, for instance, from one city to another city. And it will outline the importance with regards to public transportation itself. So if, for instance, I want to travel from Hammanskraal to, let's say, somewhere in Pretoria East over here, I would travel all the way to the transfer station over here, and then from the transfer station to my area itself. That will take you about 2.5 hours. So if you need to be at 7 at work in the morning, your day would start at 4 o'clock in the morning to get to that area itself. But what will happen if there's a problem with the buses or anything like that? It automatically raises concern with regards to the movement of people itself. So, more prominent public transportation features is we have minibus taxis. We've got multiple Tshwane bus services. We do have a BRT system, metro rail, commuter rail system, and a Gautrain itself. So the bus systems itself will be dependent on which areas do you travel in and the distance of travel itself. I'll show you shortly the minibus taxis as well. This is an example of a minibus taxi. It's basically a combi, a 14-seater, and it services basically, of course, to move around the city itself. They are linked to specific routes. So there's different owners of these taxi companies, and you are only allowed to do specific routes itself. They don't work on a time schedule. They work basically on when the taxi is full, the taxi will go. It won't leave the station if there's only 3 people in the taxi itself. More reliant on cash than booking tickets and so forth. So if it's a day-to-day activity, it can become more expensive because you can't buy month tickets or week tickets or anything like that. Then with the bus services, yes, that is whereby you can buy weekly tickets or monthly tickets or quarterly tickets to make it more cheaper and so forth. We do have multiple bus services, as mentioned earlier, depending on your travel. And then we also have a Orient BRT system, which is also a feeder system for the Gautrain itself. I'll get to the Gautrain shortly as such. So, Metrorail do exist. We did a study with regards, which I'm going to show you shortly with regards to Metrorail itself, whereby we evaluated user satisfaction itself, and that ran hand in hand with our Gautrain services. So the Gautrain services connects Pretoria and Johannesburg and the airport. It goes a bit more south with Johannesburg itself, but it connects multiple areas, but it's quite expensive. It's quite expensive to use, but it's the quickest way to travel in that specific area. And the last but not least is last mile transportation. How to get to your public transportation stop and from your public transportation stop to your house itself. And it sounds quite simple. We are doing studies based on this, but actually it's very important with regards to multiple aspects. But we'll get to that in a study which we did as well. So with regards to the accessibility chain itself, you leave your house, you go to the sidewalk path, which you walk on. What's the condition of that itself is important. Then you go to your feeder mode. So you won't necessarily go to your bus stops itself. You will, for instance, maybe use a minibus taxi to get to your bus stop itself, or a different mode, maybe a bicycle as well. Then you get to your stations, and we do studies on the stations itself. We're busy with study based on that with regards to what is expected from a station itself, what's expected from a bus stop itself. It sounds simple, but aspects such as lighting and safety and so forth do arise with that. Then you go to your main mode, which can be bus, train, minibus, taxi, and you get to your destination itself. So if, for instance, one of these chains gets lost, it may influence your trip quite significantly moving forward. So methods which we use. So we look at user satisfaction at the end of the day. But you do have to use different game plans, especially when it comes to user satisfaction. Because if I send out the survey, everybody would say, we're unhappy with everything. And that can sometimes lead the data in a specific direction whereby it's difficult to see actually what's important to the users itself. Because you want to see what's most important versus what's least important. So if I send out the survey and everybody gives me 1 out of 5 on the Likert scale, unfortunately, I'm not going to really see what is having influence. So we do like to create scenarios for users to select from. I'll show this shortly, We do measure user expectations versus reality itself, because sometimes a user would say, I'll rate out of 5, a 3 out of 5 for comfort on my trip itself. But if you ask them, what do you expect? They said, yeah, 3 out of 5, I expect 3 out of 5. It's fine. I don't mind having a 3 out of 5. So it's just giving that boundaries between what is expected and what's given. Conduct visual assessments of the surrounding itself. And we do connect this sometimes to a theoretical framework to make a bit more of sense of it. Because if you take this and you have to take it to the user or you have to take it to the government itself, it just gives a better way of explaining the outcomes of what you're doing. So here's an example, and I'm talking about using AI, but it's just easily more explained by indicating it like this. So we would use, for instance, a conjoint analysis. There's a bit more maths behind this, but we would, for instance, create scenarios. So by giving all elements, but you give, for instance, parameters differ from the one to the other one, you can, for instance, see what stands more out versus less. So, for instance, we'll look at sidewalks, access points, safety points, travel points, affordability, and so forth. We'll create 3 different scenarios, whereby we'll say the walkway is 1.5 meters. There's about 2 access points to a public transportation stop. Safety risk is low. Time spent getting to a specific point is high. Money is medium, and distance of the stops is great. Then with scenario B, you put in positives and you put in negatives in between. And suddenly you realize, okay, but the user is already happy with regards to paying a bit more money for less distance walk, for medium stops and a bit wider. And then you go over to option C, for instance, and you can say, for instance, okay, we're giving you more stops and so forth, but we can't secure your safety because there's too many stops. But your walking time would be less, but your cost would be higher. So if you start filtering in between the different scenarios with regards to what's positive versus what's negative, you can look at what scenario they select more, and you can, for instance, relate to what's more important versus what's less important. So, for instance, study can show, for instance, your travel time is most important, then secondly, safety, then reliability. So by giving a bit of a mix with regards to conjoint analysis, you can filter out what's more important and what's less important. A different method which you also can use is with regards to a gap analysis. And that's what I mentioned earlier. So I can give a lot of parameters to the participants itself. And the participants can give their frequency with regards to a 3 out of 5 for safety, for instance, a 4 out of 5 for comfort, for instance. But you ask them, what's the current situation? And you ask them, what is their expected situation? And suddenly you realize that they are happy with a 3 out of 5 for comfort. They are happy, for instance, with the walking distance. But you filter out other things suddenly with regards to maybe, for instance, the travel time is a bigger issue or the accessibility is a bigger issue because the gap becomes bigger between expectations versus reality itself. So suddenly you filter out a lot of data with regards to how to improve operations and how to upgrade the infrastructure itself. So I do have a few case studies which I'm going to run through, which we did a few papers on, whereby firstly we looked at the rail efficiency within Mamelodi area. So Mamelodi is basically situated in the eastern parts of Pretoria, but it's more in the central of the metropolitan. We had a presentation yesterday which outlined Mamelodi itself, with parks itself, but We have a look more with regards to the public transportation infrastructure, especially when it comes to metro rail. So we selected 5 different stations itself on the routes on the way going into the city itself. And we evaluated with user satisfaction what is important to a lot of these users themselves. To say, for instance, we identified the parameters, of course, through a literature study and to see what parameters stand more out versus other parameters. And we looked at how to improve, what to look at. And certainly with regards to the data which is received, you can see, for instance, it's affordable. They're happy paying for the service itself. They don't mind. And I just purposely put in a target over here of, let's say, a mean of 3 out of 5 Likert scale itself, whereby they're happy with affordability, they're happy with crowding, they're happy with comforts, they're happy with the accessibility itself. But from there on, it becomes questionable. So suddenly you look at, there's reliability concerns, there's safety concerns, and notification. And I did mention in the beginning that there's a big gap with regards to data. Now, one may not have money for data itself, so you can't always see what's the real-time updates with regards to notification on what's happening on the train systems itself. So people will pitch up at the station and suddenly realize that the services is not working today. And that's a big concern sometimes because a lot of people do rely on the infrastructure itself. And even if you say, for instance, offer an alternative, it's not outlined so strong, but again, safety itself is quite important. So my question is, can people plan, wait, travel, and transfer within reasonable certainty? So if I wake up in the morning and I need to go to work, is it possible to say 100% I'm going to be at work today? And I think that's the big question itself with regards to this research itself, whereby, and I talked about the inequalities with regards to, you can say there's a correlation between your transportation infrastructure and your economical activities itself. Because if I can't go into work, I can't make money, and it reflects back to that as such. So if I need to contribute this to the message itself and add a bit of a theoretical framework, so we did a paper whereby we added this to a value proposition canvas. I can go to the local government officials and I can say, for instance, the job basically is to arrive on time, safely and affordably. But the customers are uncertain, unsafe, and unreliable services with poor information, which basically influence their decision making at the end of the day itself. And I don't always want to use the word fix, but to give a better gain to this itself is to provide more predictable trips, clear information, safer transfers, and of course, lower stress at the end of the day. So work can already be stressful, but getting to work must not be stressful as well. The second study, whereby exploring mode choice behavior and preference in transportation users itself. So singular vehicular usage is a big thing in South Africa. So everybody has their own cars, everybody has 2 cars, depending on how many people are working within the house itself. So we did a study with regards to how can you convince people to park their car and use public transportation itself. Because that's the only way we can start looking at how to win with less vehicles on the cars, on the road itself. Because at the end of the day, you can build more and more and more highways, and the vehicles will just become more and more and more. So that's not always a solution to the problem itself. So this study, we focused more into the center of South Africa itself, which is Bloemfontein, Mangaung, which we focused on a small town over here. Not a small town, it's still metropolitan. But we looked at how we can convince the residents to move over to a public transportation infrastructure system itself. So we did surveys, of course, and we felt that a lot of the full-time employees, full-time people who are employed full-time, felt it's more important to have more reliable services because they are afraid they may lose their employment if they don't pitch up regularly to work, especially if they have to rely on the transportation system. But they also indicated that if there's more flexible times and services, it may influence their choice itself. They're not too bothered about the amount of routes available, and the information itself is medium important, but as well, the fares itself, if they feel they can win a lot, it's for them to be able to convince them to move to the other transportation field itself. So overall, we did surveys. It was quite a lot of surveys, whereby we divided it with regards to current public transportation users, private vehicle users, non-motorized transportation users, and a lot of people do love their cars in South Africa, so it's sometimes difficult for them to convince them to move away from their vehicles itself. So a strong predictor came up with regards to accessibility, reliability, affordability, and flexibility. Some of the main features. But we did a paper on this, and we developed the following framework with regards to, firstly, you need to retain your users itself. Then secondly, you have to attract new users. Because you can't just change everything, because you can maybe lose your current users because of maybe changing it too much. So you have to work hand in hand with regards to how to ensure to retain your users versus attracting new users itself. So the solid line is basically retention of the users. So keeping in mind walking distance, ease of access, safe transportation, reliable transportation, and so forth. Whereby, with regard to attract new users, you do get some of the similar stuff, but there's aspects such as getting more reliability, getting more transparency with regards to certain aspects to increase the commuters' need as well. And a park and ride was an option as well. And if you include multiple modes, it will assist as well with regards to the user itself. It's so interesting when I arrived in the UK, the amount of different modes one uses to get from point A to point B is quite significantly. And I've seen people on bicycles, and I've seen whereby they can store their bicycle and they can take their bicycle with while at the train station. You can use buses, you can use multiple modes as such. Then going over to study number 3. Now, one thing always being forgotten is pedestrians. Now, I mentioned in the earlier slide with regards to if you travel all the way from Hammanskraal, you need to be ready for the buses at 4 o'clock in the morning. You don't want to miss peak traffic. If you get peak traffic, you're not going to be on time. So now you have to walk, let's say, a mile to a bus station. See it as there's no lights working. It's in the middle of the night, and now you have to walk on either no paving, semi-paving, or very uneven grounds. And what's the effect with regards to that? So we looked at, for instance, a residential area in Bloemfontein itself, whereby this is a University of the Free State, and this is quite a student-driven residential area. And we did an evaluation based on sidewalks itself. And what we found is, with regards to the importance of sidewalks itself, what's the influence on pedestrian activity itself. So everybody over here needs to get here, as simple as that. And I just outlined a few important things around the area itself, but there's a lot of pedestrian activity itself. Now, what happens in South Africa is a lot of places don't have sidewalks. So over here, no sidewalk. No sidewalk plants, no sidewalk trees, and a bit of gardening, a bit of a sidewalk, but not too much. And what happens if there's no sidewalks? Everybody walks in the streets. If you need to walk around the block, you need to walk in the street. And we did a basic evaluation based on this, and it was a bit with regards to conjoint analysis as well, whereby we evaluate a lot of aspects with regards to what's important and what's less important with regards to users itself. So questions that was asked is width. Can two people walk comfortably next to one another, or is just a general path in the middle of the road itself? Surface, is the route usable in a daily condition? So if you walk at night and you have a lot of stone you have to walk over and stuff like that, the probability is high that somebody would fall over, as easy as that. Obstacles are driveway, vegetation, and objects blocking the movement itself. Elevation, are they level changing, manageable for all users? These days, if you go into stations, there's clearly indicated, watch out for a step, watch out for this. But if you're in the middle of the night and you have to walk and there's no light or anything like that, what do you need to do? And of course, safety itself. Safety is quite an important thing. So we are busy with a study as well, whereby we looked at last mile transportation for Tshwane itself. It's unpublished, so I can't say too much. But whereby we outline important aspects with regards to what's necessary versus what's not necessary out of a planning perspective of moving through a public transportation system, especially with regards to walkability and so forth. And then the last study is something which I work with people in this room as well, whereby we looked at accessibility. So we looked at aspects with regards to people's need to get accessibility to public transportation itself, but we also need to look at how places can be forgotten because there's no accessibility to those places itself. And this is especially with regards to a tourism perspective. So if, for instance, there's no linkage to specific places itself, is it possible to use those spaces? Or do you need to have a car to get to spaces itself? Even if you have a car, is those spaces outlined in such a way that you can pick it up quite quickly and easily, and it's easy for you to get to that space itself? So we did a study with regards to places itself and signage and accessibility itself with regards to the accessibility to spaces itself. So what I've seen, for instance, in the UK, you do pay a lot for parking around here. You go anywhere, you need to pay for parking. Whereby South Africa, it's a bit different. You don't have to pay, but there's also a security risk with regards to you're leaving your vehicle somewhere. And so it's a catch-22 system itself. Again, with regards to public transportation, and we evaluated the park in Mamelodi, it's Nelson Mandela Park, with regards to public access out of the public transportation section, how it's advertised, how it's leading people to a specific location. And we compared, for instance, with regards to something which was more commercial, which was named the same thing, but it's much more commercial as the other park itself. And you can see the vast amount of signals and stops and so forth versus the one place versus the other place. And basically how accessibility can be influenced with regards to how the planning is being done for that specific area itself. So what should be measured at the end of the day? If we look at systems itself, do we have to look at access, walking distance, stop proximity, sidewalk conditions? Should we look at reliability, waiting time, punctuality, disruptions, experience, safety? Not just road safety, but safety itself. Can you feel safe to approach a stop itself? Information, or working on more apps, more wayfinding and so forth for the stations itself. Affordability, a fair burden, and the confidence. I think the confidence is quite important. That knowing that tomorrow when I get up at a certain time, I know my public transportation system is going to be there and so forth. So we are busy writing we're finishing off, we were actually supposed to submit the paper, but time catched up with us before coming here. But basically what was outlined in the paper is that aspects such as speed of your public transportation system is not that important as, for instance, reliability. As, for instance, knowing that you will get to a place itself. It may not be super fast, but I will be on time at my desired location itself. So, thank you very much. I think I may be 5 minutes quick, but thank you very much. That's my LinkedIn linked, and that's my email and so forth. Any questions?
Thank you for listening to the podcast of Loughborough University's Institute of Advanced Studies. A quick reminder about how to stay connected. You can find us on Blue Sky, LinkedIn and Instagram, and you can also watch the presentations on YouTube. The podcast is available on all the major platforms. Please download, share, and most importantly, subscribe. See you next time.